Good PowerPoint? Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is interesting. It's not a, some of our lectures are real heavy in content. This one is a little more heavy in just awareness. There's not a great deal of facts here, but getting your head around the challenges faced for parents and for kids during this middle childhood year is important. So I have to, I like to throw in cartoons no matter how useful they are. But so one of the things I put this in here because parents are faced with so much information, the pros and cons of social media and interconnectivity, right? The pro is I can learn things. I'm on Facebook and I learn a lot of things I really care about. I'm into burgers. I'm on Facebook pages about burgers. I've been working on trying to get a vaccine. I learn about things like that. I follow people that feed, that deal with feeding infants and toddlers. And so there's so much benefit we can get, but you guys know that for everything that comes, those of you that deal with social media, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, whatever comes across your feed, nobody knows if it's true unless the originators have some validity in what they say. And I think that's the piece where you are the experts, because upon graduation, you will be those experts, but you're going to find other people that just have a whole lot of opinions about allergies and whatever and how to feed kids based on squat. I'm sure you've seen this. I see people all the time that just state unequivocally, this is a fact, but they don't have a degree, education, or anything. They just want it to be true. So anyway, I bring this up because parents are faced with, oh my goodness, is there something wrong with my kids? What should I be really careful about the diet? Do they have gluten sensitivity? Do they have peanut allergy? Do I really care about GMOs? How bad is high fructose? What about dairy? So they're faced with all these things, right? And how much of this is true? And that's probably to get to this in a better way, or a better way would be through going to graduate school, because we dig into these topics. But I can say now that, for each of these things, peanut allergies are real. We have learned, as we talked about last time, that the best way to avoid allowing a child to develop a peanut allergy is early and often to provide peanuts earlier. Gluten-free only affects kids that actually have celiac disease, and that needs a test. GMOs are honestly, it's just right now it's a quack thing. Right now there's no evidence that we need to worry about avoiding GMO foods. High fructose, it depends on the foods. If there's high fructose corn chips, not good for you. Sodas aren't good for you anyway. If you have a loaf of bread and somebody put in some kind of sweetener in minute amounts, it probably doesn't matter what it is. It's probably a volume issue. Milk products, if there's a dairy allergy. So everyone seems complicated, and it takes you a thorough education to be able to weigh in on how important it is. But you have to be able to look at the evidence, because you're against people that are faced with people who have opinions about each of these things with no knowledge of the science. Right. So what we want to kind of do is, through our undergraduate and graduate programs, is methodically go through the science so you have the confidence in your opinions about these things. So the outline of this lecture, we're going to talk about growth to get your head around this middle-aged child group. We'll talk about screening for some nutritional problems and recommendations on just a few nutrients. And then body imaging dieting really doesn't manifest clinically and usually until kids are teenagers, but the origin of the behaviors that may, and the feelings and emotions that may trigger body image issues and dieting can start earlier during these young ages. This is really a scary thought. Some girls in the 5th grade are eating salad for lunch because they're preserving their figure and things like that just goes against everything we believe in child growth, and appropriate child growth. So this begins to manifest around these ages. And then this last topic, parenting and feeding styles, this is a big deal. So we'll get to this, and I really want you to think about it because we don't learn, we can all have kids. Everybody can reproduce and have a child, right? Most people can, right? And so there's not a license to do that. We have to have a license to drive a car, but we don't have to have a license to grow another human and raise it, And so we need information on how to do that. And most parents don't have enough. And through childbirth years, pregnancy and so forth, you oftentimes have classes. And then typically the social structure drops out and no one knows what to do. So they either figure it out on their own or they go to social media and, pros and cons about that information. So just kind of want to bring these things up for you to be thinking about. So let's look at growth. And there's some important concepts here. During early childhood, kids get lower in body fat because they become very active in a perfect world. In today's TV world, they may miss this, but in the world where kids went outside to play, like a pre-COVID world, right, too. When kids went outside to play, their normal body fat was pretty low for the most part for kids. But then at age 6 to 7, normally, kids would increase their body fat. Normal. Body fat is not a horrible thing. It is part of the human body. It's important for everybody to realize that. So normally, females would go up to 19% fat and males go up a little bit. So you can see the growth curve here. So this is looking at BMI here. So you can see in the first few years, or this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see right here where the normal curves, there's a decrease in body fat and then it goes up. That point at which it goes up around ages 6 to 7 is called adiposity rebound. That's a normal thing. Kids get fatter. That's okay. Adults have fat in our bodies. That's not a bad thing. From advertisement and all these things, we feel like, oh, well, I should only be lean and I should only do this. That's not the human body. The human body, like whales and manatees and dolphins and other mammals, have fat. Okay, so getting that in your head is a good thing. Muscles are also good, but fat's not a horrible thing. It's when people become overly fat where health risks become a problem. So the adiposity rebound at age 6 to 7 is normal. These growth curves are normal. What we worry about is if a kid's adiposity rebound begins too early. I always ask a question on this, so on your probably next exam, but if adiposity rebound occurs early, such as age 4, right here, or 5, it's so, in other words, instead of the trajectory following this curve, the kids, wherever they start, their trajectory goes up off the curve. They can even start here. This is their normal trajectory. Instead of rebounding at 6 to 7, they rebound early. And so their personal BMI growth curve goes up, not in accordance with the shape of these lines. What that is, early adiposity rebound is a high risk factor for childhood obesity. And it's because childhood obesity has so many ramifications for the life of a child and the health of the child. We have to care about it. It's not a pejorative thing. I'll bring this up later. It's not negative. Oh, they don't look good. It's not about that. It's about what's their long-term health. How's their life going to be? Are we getting them off to the best start that we can? Are they nutritionally solid as possible? So that's why we talk about these things. So this is the normal changes in body composition. Then you worry about adiposity rebound. And also, every parent also needs to calm down because growth spurts happen. It happens from infancy on. You may be a woman may be formula feeding or breastfeeding a baby, and they all of a sudden between 2 and 4 months want to eat a whole lot more. Like, what's going on? Are they okay? Should I try to restrict them? No, let them eat to their appetite because growth spurts happen. So it's really hard for breastfeeding women because they may be at 2 months and they go, okay, I got this, it's working. And all of a sudden the baby's hungry all the time. And then they think, oh my goodness, I don't have enough milk. What am I going to do? And so there's lots of advice for this. And lactation consultants will just keep putting the baby at breast. Y'all remember removing milk stimulates milk production, but it takes a little time. So it can be frustrating and confusing for parents. But it's important for everybody to know that growth spurts happen, and not just about infant formula and breast milk, but let's just think about kids at age 2, 3, or 4. Sometimes kids don't seem to eat very much at all. They're full of energy and they get up and they just pick at breakfast, they pick at lunch, and they pick at dinner. And sometimes that's just, most of the time that's fine. They've got some internal regulation going on. So they're eating to hunger. And when we say, you know what, you have to sit at your table for another 10 minutes and try to whatever we want them to finish, we're teaching them to ignore the hunger. So what we really want to do is make sure there's healthful foods there, there's parameters about mealtime, they have to stay there a certain period of time, all this kind of stuff. But we don't harp on what they put in their mouth, because, and I'll get to this later because this parenting style really matters, but we need to calm down about growth spurts. Sometimes they'll eat so much you think, oh my God, I don't have enough money. And then sometimes they won't eat and you think I'm failing as a parent. And neither thing is happening. So problems with for screening are interesting. I don't go into detail of all of these, so I'm going to kind of address these together in middle-aged kids. Some of them develop full-blown iron deficiency anemia or continue it from toddlerhood. So there's always that risk. We've talked about that. Some kids continue to have this problem. All kids have trouble with dental caries. We used to call them cavities. But what happens is, I think we have a grazing society where we don't just eat meal. Kids should eat meal, snack, meal, snack, meal, snack. So, but some adults, you probably are aware of this, some adults just eat all day, right? We stopped having just 3 squares a day. You know, my generation, that's what we did. We had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we're done. We're really lucky we had ice cream for dinner, but not that often, right? So it was 3 discrete meals. And so the habits of the US population kind of changed from being 1, 2, 3 to going, well, here's a snack, and then here's some more, and then here's some soda, or here's something to drink. And so kids' teeth are constantly bathed in sugar, and that's gonna, or carbs, like gummy foods like white bread or other breads that stick to the teeth are the progenitors of dental caries. So that's an issue. And then overweight kind of goes along with that. Our snacking behavior, where, and I have it down here too, where snacking is the norm instead of having some discrete periods of eating is an issue. Eating disorders start early sometimes, and along with that can be skipping breakfast. Now, skipping breakfast is not the worst habit in the world for an adult, but for kids, it probably is, because, remember when kids went to school? So when they went to school, going in with food helped them learn. And school meal programs arose to help kids that didn't have enough food at home have food when they showed up, and then help them learn. So skipping food altogether, I don't care about adults, it's a different thing. But for kids, they need some calories to keep them going. They don't have the same storage that adults have. Like, their liver's not as big. Our liver can store a lot of carbohydrates as glycogen. Kids' livers are small. They get hungry, right? And they get hungry between meals. And so providing calories in food is a critical thing. And then you may see, along with an eating disorder issue, some kids avoiding food groups. And we'll talk about this, and we've talked about some, you can avoid some food groups and you're fine. You don't have to eat meat, but you need to think about iron and zinc. You don't have to consume dairy, but you need to think about calcium and vitamin D, and there needs to be other sources of that. So avoiding food groups may or may not be a red flag for a family. Snacking, I already talked about. There's room in the world for snacking, but also, what is the snack? And feeding young kids, when you think of meal, snack, so on, everything's nutrient dense. A snack is not like a 6-pound snickerdoodle, right? Which will ruin palate, ruin their nutrient intake, and ruin their love for food, right? So snacks should really be real foods that maybe you would offer a meal. Forrest, anything else? Are there any comments about this? This is kind of an overview, but I won't go into a lot more detail about it. Y'all are good?
I have a question. How do you walk the line between all these things? Because I was talking to Miss Fisher because she's into eating disorders, and she's like telling us all these things about how you can't force kids to eat, that you have to be really, really careful about how you approach eating with your kids. But then on the other side, you have to make sure they're eating, or else they're going to be, they're going to have a nutrition like deficit somewhere. So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I do. Okay, so I think, did I talk about Ellen Satter in the last thing? I think I did. So Ellen Satter, last lecture, but we talked about Ellen Satter at some point. She's a person that is an expert on feeding kids and helping families avoid eating disorders from either eating too much or restricting food and stuff like that. So, and we're going to get to that in the end of this lecture too. So we're going to talk about parenting styles, and parenting styles really matter. And if parents are naturally super controlling, that has the negative effect, right? Trying to control, you need to eat this, you need to eat this, you can't get down to do this. That doesn't improve their nutrient intake. If parents are very indulgent, that doesn't either, because then they get donuts all the time, right? But if parents are kind of middle of the road, the term is authoritative, and we'll get to that in this lecture, where, here's the food, your meals provided by a variety of foods. I'm not going to micromanage what you put in your mouth. In fact, I'm not that interested. So I'm more interested in the conversation. How did your day go? How did this go? So you're thoughtful, mealtime is pleasurable. You don't try to force somebody to eat volumes. No, I'm gonna and let it go. And I think most kids self-regulate. Not everybody will, but most do. But then if a child won't try anything because they get neophobia, which means they don't like to try new foods, it's not such a bad idea to say, here's the rule. For dinner, when we have new foods, you have to take a bite. Next time, you don't like this food, you still have to take a bite. And then the bite's fine. And it's just part of the thing. So they learn, for one thing, you're demonstrating to them and you explain to them, I'm having you take a bite because you might really like this food. And a lot of people really like it. But then I'm not going to put this cloud over you and make you eat this stuff all the time. So it's a dance. It's a dance of providing healthful foods and then taking a step back and not being so aggressive. Does that make sense, Brianna? Because this is hard. It's one of the hardest things of parenting, I think.
As the mother of a 10-year-old girl, it's extremely hard and really scary.
It is scary, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I remember I didn't know any of this stuff when I was raising kids, right? So I've learned a lot. And one of the things that having raised kids, it makes the stuff more interesting to me about this. And I let my kids eat whatever they wanted to later because I'm just probably not that great of a disciplinarian. My daughter started eating a lot of sugar, and I just kind of let it go because I thought when she was a teenager, it'd level out, and it did. But I think I probably shouldn't have let her do that so much. I probably should have set some boundaries, right? And so it's easy. Hindsight's great. It's easy to look back and go, I wish I'd done something different, but it's impossible to predict the future. So all we can do for parents is give them some advice and try to help them relax about it. And I think a critical piece here is have healthful foods with some snacks and treats, or not with some treats, and calm down and don't try to micromanage. But that's easier said than done. It's like telling people right now, hey, don't panic because of COVID. Right? We've all been somewhere where we've panicked. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, I just try to prepare things in different ways to give different opportunities to eat something she doesn't like and find a way that she can eat it and it's a little bit more pleasurable.
I predict when she's 18 or maybe 19 when she's gone away from you, um, she's going to look back on that and appreciate it. I've seen so many students over the years that appreciate their parents working on them to try new foods, yet not being controlling. There's so many parents that appreciate that. We didn't have soda in the house. I'm so glad. I'm glad my parents wanted me to try things, so good luck. Parenting is the hardest job in the world. We don't get trained for it. We should all have in class, we should all have parenting classes, right? In high school, college, like first and foremost. And it's like instead you go, here's a baby, good luck. So anyway, not easy. So I don't ask you questions about energy needs except to say that calm down, okay? We have equations. If you're working clinically, you can look at the size of a child, the weight and height. You can calculate their calorie requirements. Just like you've learned in nutritional assessment, there's equations to figure out what the caloric requirement for somebody may be. And what I really want to point out here is the difference in caloric requirement for an 8-year-old girl based on her activity. Look how different this is. My goodness, if she's a very active kid, she needs a lot of food and she'll probably maintain a healthy weight and just be fine. And she needs that food. And if coaches and people are telling her, hey, don't eat, you need to be thinner, they can just throw a wrench in the work. But she probably needs a lot of calories. Where somebody that's sitting around watching TV and, Netflix or whatever people are doing, more social media, unfortunately, the calorie requirements are so low. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of foods that are low in calories for kids. If we eat processed foods, the calories kind of add up. So it's important to think about kids being active, offering a variety of helpful foods and helping them be active. And there's so many cool ways to do this. One of the videos I posted for you talks about this, but this involves a parent engagement. Hey, we're all going to go for a walk every night before or after dinner. We all ride our bikes or do whatever. And so we emulate a physical activity and make sure they get to engage in that, because I tell you what, it's a whole lot more fun to be active and eat than it is to be sedentary and only eat a few calories. Humans like food and a lot of our food's delicious, so it does help. Activity helps. These numbers I will not ask you. I know everybody's going to write this down, but I just like to throw this out, the macronutrient distribution, because there are AMDRs for every age group over 2. And so what I do want to point out is there's a range of requirements for fat, carbohydrate, and protein. Notice there's a range here. There's not like one perfect magic bullet that works, but there's a range. And that's fine. Where we run into trouble, I think, is when this number gets too high, or this one or this one. For fat, they don't need to eat a diet 50% calories and fat, so moderation is a good thing. Protein is fine. We know it's important for growth, but we don't need to overdo it. But more than that, this is what bothers me about these tables is this is so generic. I mean, a carbohydrate is not a carbohydrate. Is not a carbohydrate, right? So sugar is real different than brown rice or quinoa or something, right? Those are food sources, or sweet potato. Those are food sources high in carbohydrate, and nutritionally and with respect to satiety and enjoyment of eating, they're real different. So these are terms and ranges, but more important than the number is what the foods are. And so, but I do want to bring this up. This is putting these recommendations into numbers. And sometimes the gram numbers help us, because if we know these numbers and then we look at a food label, that puts it in perspective. So a 4 to 8-year-old kid needs 19 grams of protein a day. Most parents probably give them 3 times that much if they do eggs and meat and beans and so forth, dairy. They can way overload them in protein. They don't need that much. We don't need to calm down about high protein foods. They don't need to go to McDonald's and have chicken nuggets as, oh, good, that's good protein. They need a variety of foods. And honestly, more than anything, they need lots of plants. But just giving you an idea that this is a not very high number. this number, do you remember why the adults have why do we have a requirement for carbohydrates? Just think about adult nutrition. Why do we need carbohydrates? Can we leave them out?
Main source of energy.
Say what? Yeah, they're a good source of energy.
Yes, we need it for energy. Main
Yeah.
source.
So what if we just, you can make glucose from some protein, right? Remember, I don't know if you remember this from your lectures in the past, but we can take some amino acids and make glucose from them, gluconeogenesis. So can we just leave out carbohydrates entirely?
No, because that's where we get the majority of our micronutrients from.
Okay, but why? Why don't we not? Why don't we? What if we get more protein or more fat? It's okay that you guys don't know, but that's why I'm asking. I want to find out because this is a big deal. So we need to consume carbohydrates. There are many diets out there for adults to help them lose weight, and low carb diets work. They can work for a while. They may not work in perpetuity. Oftentimes people may gain weight back, but if someone switches what they're eating to reducing carbs, a lot of times their body weight goes down. That's fine. Most of us probably eat too many sources of carbs and not good for us, but we need some. The reason that there's a DRI and the 130 grams per day is the same for these kids as it is for adults. The reason that we even require carbohydrates is because the brain needs glucose. So for neurological function, we need about 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. Most people consume a lot more than this, but this is the bare minimum here. So if let's picture a 12-year-old that's working on sports and getting misinformed, and the coach says, well, cut back on carbs. That'll help you lose your weight for your whatever you're doing, your competition. They need carbs for neurological function and then also for energy. Carbs are not bad things. They are not the enemy of the people. What's the enemy is large amounts of highly processed foods based on carbohydrates. So that gets to all the junk food in the world. Almost everything you think of as a snack food is made from highly processed carbohydrates that often have fat and sugar involved. And that's what hurts our health over and over and over again. Some carbs are fine. Even more carbs are fine. If you eat whole grains and your brown rice and your quinoa and sweet potatoes and corn and all these things that are real food sources, people benefit from the carbs, but they also don't suffer from the risk for obesity so much. Where we suffer is when we eat foods that are highly processed and we eat too much of them. Right? A lot of fast food, think about, I don't eat fast food at all, but I know it exists. So let's say you go through McDonald's and you get, whatever passes for whatever burger people eat, and then it's French fries and ketchup. So that meal has 2 white flour buns and a whole lot of starch from the French fries and probably sugar from the ketchup. So eating that's just going to knock their carbohydrate intake out of the park. So moderation in all things. So can we never go to McDonald's again? No, that's ridiculous if that's something that's important to you. But just go every now and then. And if you do, ideally split it. Split whatever burger you like and then split the fries with someone. And for kids, they don't need that much. So it has to do with food habits, food sources, and quantity and quality of carbs. And fiber goes along with that. If you're actually eating your carbs from whole food sources, fiber intake's okay. It's when you eat, Captain Crunch for breakfast that this doesn't work. Any comments on this?
I just want to make sure I understood what you meant. So it's not necessarily the carbohydrates that are the problem. It's when you're eating processed foods and the fat and the sugar that goes along with eating high carb foods?
It's both. It's not just the fat and sugar and salt, although it's part of it. But actually, when you're eating, let's say, a Pop-Tart donut or something like that, right? A bakery bagel that's basically equivalent to 3 or 4 slices of white bread. They're really tasty. The carbohydrate load is huge, way over our requirements. And because it's processed, when we eat that, what happens metabolically is your blood sugar goes up, and then your organ systems go, oh my goodness, we need to manage all this carbohydrate. So they will store, carbohydrate as glycogen in the liver and the muscles, and then excess will be converted to fat or take over metabolism and other things. So high doses of refined carbs are absorbed very quickly, send up that insulin levels, cause us to gain too much weight. But if we eat carbohydrates that slowly, that are whole foods, then the absorption rate is lower. And that means our blood sugar doesn't shoot up, but it gets elevated when we eat, and we take our time, then our liver and muscles do their job, and we store the excess carbs to use later. So the processed foods cause an enormous rise in blood sugar. It can affect insulin production and all the things that can lead us towards metabolic disease and maybe overweight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then one more thing, because I've heard this before. So when people say to eat stuff, replace refined sugars with things like honey, and is that the same way?
Honey's the same thing. All super sweet foods are the same, so honey's not a thing.
And agave is the thing either. Like those, so it's basically the same thing.
Yep, same thing. Anybody else? You guys have any? Y'all good with this? All right, moving on. Okay, so there's a few nutrients, as I indicate, that we talk about for every age group. So iron, I told you in the beginning, we would beat iron to death all semester. So at this age group, there's a risk for anemia. And actually, when I was 7 in my world, which is a billion years ago, I was diagnosed with iron deficiency anemia. And they actually said that I was sick from this. And I think I normally, at that time I was a child that ate all the varied diet. So my normal iron levels are lower than probably most people's. And iron, I've talked to you about this, can affect, especially in younger years, it can affect cognition and everything else, and IQ and intellectual capacity. So we really care. So if you guys are cranky because I can't remember anything, I'm going to blame, I was formula fed, and then also I was anemic at age 7 or something, right? So I'm just kidding around here. So, but anyway, so what we want to do with iron is care. We want to continue to care and make sure that kids get the iron that they need. So tell me some high foods that are high in iron that would support a good iron status.
Red meat.
Red meat, no brainer. Any other meats? Okay, so this is what's hard for me being in a Zoom class, because a couple of you will talk and most people won't. And the problem with that is it's not about me, it's about you and your colleagues. If you're not willing to talk or throw anything in there, this lecture is going to be a whole lot more boring than it would be if you contributed. So those of you that talk all the time or sometimes really help. So I'm going to answer this question, but I also want to encourage you, to the extent that you're comfortable, to throw out ideas. I don't want to shoot them down, but I want to know what you know and what you think about. And so it's hard. I'm in a bubble right here trying to figure out how to educate you. So I'll go on and talk about a diet that supports good iron status. And if you want to add anything at the end, that's great. But so red meat is usually the first thing that most Americans bring up because red meat, it's red and so forth. We know it's a good source of iron. There are other meats that also provide iron. There's chicken and turkey. There's fish. Those are so in pork. They also provide iron, but there's a difference between something like red meat and fish. Red meat has more heme iron, which is more bioavailable, but red meat is high in saturated fat. Fish, on the other hand, let's think salmon. Fish, on the other hand, may be high in fat, but the fat is high in omega-3 essential fatty acids. So red meat versus fish. Red meat gives you more iron, but saturated fat. Fish gives you some iron, a good amount of iron, and then healthy fats, right? So in the nutrition of the world, we study nutrients like iron, zinc, calcium. That's important to think about. What really matters is what are the food vehicles of these things. So what are they? So meat, fish, poultry are high in iron and zinc. Beans are also higher in iron. Actually, eggs also contain a reasonable amount of iron. And also a lot of plants have some too, right? So your green leafy vegetables also have iron. A well-balanced diet provides a variety of these items. We absorb more iron from meat, fish, and poultry than we do from beans and vegetables and dried fruit, for example. However, if you add up how much iron we get from our diet on a daily basis, if we're eating healthy foods, most of it comes from non-heme sources like dried fruits, vegetables, nuts, and so forth, beans. So that when I ask you to describe a diet or a meal that supports good iron status, I hope you can think about this. So what we've talked about before too is a meal that has, for example, meat in it. If you have beans too, the meat actually helps us absorb the iron from the beans. You have vitamin C that helps us absorb the iron from the beans. So a diet full of whole foods provides more bioavailable iron than a processed diet. So I'm just give you a minute for this and then I'll go on to the next slide. Any comments about this?
I'm just wondering, what would you kind of say just to someone who's like iron deficient, but they might be vegan or vegetarian? Would you just still just keep pushing like the beans and green leafy vegetables? And should they get anything fortified? Should they take supplements? Like, what would you consider?
It's a really great question. And I started this out by talking I'm pro-vegetarian. So vegetarian, my pro diet is vegetarian with some fish, because I think that's probably ideal. But if people don't want to eat any animal products or at least eat any animal flesh, then there's a variety of ways to go. Eating larger volumes of beans, for example, making sure dried fruits work, and making sure it has some fortified products. And I'm not against iron supplements either. So maybe, multiple vitamin mineral supplements, probably not a bad idea. I think you can eat a vegetarian diet for a lifetime and thrive. Vegan diets, you better take more supplements because it's not just iron and zinc. We always have to worry about B12 and stuff as well. So mostly, if a person is eating a vegan or vegetarian diet, if you're choosing real food, mostly they'll be healthy. But sometimes people adopt these diets and they just eat, processed foods that are sold under their umbrella. So you don't want to do that. So if they're eating whole foods, that's okay. If they're vegans, they need iron and B12 and zinc supplements, and probably vitamin D and calcium supplements because we don't get enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Calcium, we've kind of talked about this same thing. I have your DRIs here. This is close to what adults need. I'll just do this for you. I don't know why I get so much input, but so a diet rich in calcium, we always think of milk, yogurt, dairy products, and that's fine. Milk's fine, yogurt's fine, especially non-Greek yogurt, but just regular yogurt. Greek yogurt actually is higher in protein, but some of the calcium has been removed. So the dairy products are fine. Cottage cheese, same thing. It's okay. It's not super high. Regular yogurt, regular milk are pretty high in calcium. Among cheeses, Parmesan cheese is particularly high, which is just kind of a fun fact. And then if you get into other items besides dairy, we have sardines and canned salmon. They're high in calcium. That's because there's bones in those products. Some people are put off by sardines, but a lot of people really like them. So it's a good way to do it. Beans and lentils also have a good amount. White beans are pretty high in calcium, for example. Almonds among the nuts have some. So a variety of greens too can help. So kale and bok choy are good sources. Spinach is not so much. But so as you can see, there's a wide variety of foods that provide calcium. Okay, the next issue is about hydration. For parents, you're going from micromanaging the kid and what they get at meals to kind of letting them go, and then they go hang out with their peers, and what are they going to do? So they may be involved in sports. So what we want to do is think about their fluid intake. We want to make sure they get enough fluids. And some kids are good at it, some kids aren't that thirsty, but you need to think about it. And it's also important to push this for them and remind them, because they may not sweat that easily. And they can, in sports, they could actually get overheated. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I've done a run or something and I come away and I'm red faced and people think I'm going to die. It's because I probably didn't hydrate enough. So hydration is important, and kids need parents and guardians and caregivers to make sure that they're getting enough fluids. But you don't do this by giving them Gatorade and crap. And so this is so interesting. If you've ever been involved in a sports group with kids, you know, parents take turns, you know, being coaches, and then they bring in snacks, and a lot of parents will bring in snacks, and our norm is so, you know, junk food oriented. You have to be careful about this. You could set up parameters for snacks. So oranges, sometimes people do that, and so forth. Water is good. These kids, if they worked out on a soccer field for an hour, they don't need Gatorade or orange juice. They need water and a piece of orange. You know, we overdo supplements. Well, we're fine with slices of oranges and water. It's also cheaper and better for the environment. Those juice boxes are just bullshit. Sorry for the environment and for the food industry and all the things that we provide. Just give them water. In fact, best case scenario, have them bring their cups from home and have a thermos there and have them get their own water and drink it, and give them orange slices. So we help the environment and also provide the nutrients they need. But they don't need, an hour of activity for a kid does not mean they need a 200 calorie bottle of Gatorade. Any comments about this?
I know for adults it's important to consume electrolytes because we, you know, as adults we sweat a lot. Do kids not need things like Gatorade because they don't sweat easily?
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to say that almost nobody, except for extreme athletes, need something like Gatorade. You know, most of us, and I used to, when I was in class with people, I would talk about this quite a bit. You know, if we're active, and I've been active my whole life too, right? And I'm active for several hours a day now. Not as high active as I was when I was younger. I was running more, right? But I'd play pickleball. I'm outside. I go for walks. According to my watch, I spend 700 calories a day doing stuff. I am completely comfortable that my diet and water provides the electrolytes and nutrients that I need to replace what I use. Where it really gets into an issue is people that are athletes. So let's say somebody's doing a big bicycle ride, right? So they're going for 40 miles. They may need electrolyte supplements for that, but an hour of activity, high activity, or a couple hours of regular activity, water is fine. And, add fruits as needed and so forth, but we don't need Gatorade. Gatorade is marketed to people. If you think about it, let's say you don't need it and you drink it, then what you're doing is just adding more calories to your diet. And liquid calories, I know you talk about this in physiology, but liquid calories actually add calories but don't make us feel full. So if we eat an orange, that affects our hunger, and we go, oh, I just had some food, and it's not enough for a meal, but we feel it. But if we eat the equivalent, if we drink the equivalent amount of electrolytes and sugar from Gatorade, our brain doesn't even know we had it. So it doesn't. Our brain is actually tallying how many calories we've had all day. So caloric balance has to do with the hypothalamus and figuring things out and how much you eat and so forth. We can interfere with that balance by drinking extra calories with sugar. So we don't need them. And this is probably for parents that are working with kids in exercise programs. Man, orange slices and water are the best thing. They don't need the garbage that our society offers for people, including adults. Anybody? I love arguments or naysayers, so if you don't like this, please talk. I miss you guys. I would give anything to see you in person.
So you're saying that Gatorade isn't necessary, but is it specifically because of the calories? Like what if they opted for, let's say, like the G2 Gatorade, like that low calorie or sugar free or whatever? Is that okay, or is it just like the overload of electrolytes is just just not good for the body?
Okay, so I'm gonna backtrack here and say that I've taught sports nutrition. So I have that background, but I'm not a sports nutrition researcher. My research has mostly been infant and toddler nutrition, also weight management in adults, and also in WIC education, which works across the lifespan. So I have lots of experience, and I've actually done some research in physical activity requirements and caffeine and stuff. So I have some background as a researcher. But to answer your question, I'm very careful about making like bold statements that say this is bad and this is good. And that's because science should be offered under the umbrella of nuance, right? So black and white doesn't exist. So to get at your question, is Gatorade bad or good? I can't answer that. For somebody super physically active, maybe the Gatorade, modified Gatorade product you talked about's fine. Those things may be fine. People may go for decades consuming products like that and they're fine. However, when I get to thinking about children, adults do certain things with food that may not be, or beverages that may not be really appropriate for the kids. And they may overestimate how much calories the kids need based on their actions. So if kids go play soccer for an hour, they don't need Gatorade and whatnot. They actually probably need nothing except water. Parents like to bring things to them. So it's a different question if you go from sports athletes to kids. For kids, we just need to calm down. They don't need that much. Is Gatorade poison across the universe? No. Is it overhyped? Yeah. As an athlete or as an armchair, or as an athlete that, no, I have to say, as a person that likes to play games that's not athletic, probably they don't need something like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks for asking, Joe. I appreciate it. Okay, so you're probably seeing these recommendations everywhere, but we know that sugar, salt, and high saturated fat diets are not ideal. So there are recommendations about amounts, and I threw in, this isn't on your slideshow, but I threw this in here for sugar for kids in middle age groups. Less than 6 teaspoons a day is about 25 grams. So you might want to add that, write that down when you're taking notes. So salt is about a teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of salt provides 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And, we have a little latitude with butter. So let me just say here, these items are, the reason there's limits on these is because individually each of them is associated with disease. Sugar is associated with cardiovascular disease and obesity. Salt is associated with hypertension. Saturated fat is associated with obesity and cardiovascular disease. So if you look at these individually, you go, oh my goodness, of course there's limits. But what I think is so interesting is if we don't take a reductionist approach, instead we look at what our meals are like. If I think about these things and then I construct meals, I can easily construct meals that have some butter in them because butter's tasty, some salt because we need some seasoning, and sugar if we want it. But I don't want to go overboard. So dinner shouldn't be, 5, dessert shouldn't be 5 brownies, right? So moderation gives us a little nuance here and a little wiggle room too. We don't have to be perfect, but we want to try to be close to perfect and then allow salt, sugar, and saturated fat to make things good. Here's an example. So last night, really good, I've gotten really good during COVID and making meals, but so our dinner last night, we made a big bag of broccoli and I microwaved it, which I usually roasted, right? So I added like a teaspoon of butter, maybe a little more, and some salt and tossed it. And it was just like unbelievable. We each ate 2.5 cups of broccoli. That's what salt and saturated fat are for. They can make vegetables seem delicious. But if we eat them in a pastry or something, then we've used up that allotment, and then the rest of our meals, well, how am I going to make my broccoli taste good? Because honestly, steamed broccoli without anything is not all that good. So there's limits on these things, but there's ways to incorporate them into your meals that make your food fine. They're not poison. High doses are poison.
Can you repeat what you said about sugar that wasn't on the slide?
I have, do you see my slide here? It says listed 6 teaspoons.
Yes.
It's in red.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's the only thing I said that's not on the slide. And I told you it wasn't on the slide. Anybody want to talk about this? Because I've been studying this for 30, 40 years. And I think we look at nutrients like this or items like sugar, salt, and fat, and we can get really religious about it. Oh, don't do this. But we can also use these foods to make our whole foods meals taste better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't eat like a piece of whole wheat toast without butter. Like you wouldn't eat it dry. Like it's disgusting. You'd want to put something on it. Doesn't necessarily have to be butter, but you need it to make your food flavorful.
Thank you. So perfect example, almond butter or something, right? Does it have fat? Absolutely. Is it delicious when you add, if you like it, to toast? It's unbelievably good. So it's just, you guys learning to make food in alignment with nutrition advice is a skill that you're going to develop your whole life. But it's fun. And translating nutrient requirements to food is fun and critical for being a good nutrition person. So the the government has put together, when they were active on this, really good guidance here. So if you look at guidance for middle group age kids, grains, at least half whole, vegetables in cups, fruits in cups, dairy and protein foods. This is a very easy way to think about meals. So when you make a breakfast, what pieces of the breakfast should be in there? Sometimes people pick dairy and they pick grains and fruit because that's our typical breakfasts. For lunch, then you want to expand in the other categories. Maybe for lunch, you pick up protein food and so on and so forth. It's just something to look at. Okay, so food practices with kids. This is how you get kids really engaged in the food process. Purchasing food, you can bring them to the store with you. Remember when we used to go to stores? So we did do that. And you bring them and they might want to try things. And so you can involve them and you can help them cook. Kids love to cook with you. It's so fun. It's so much better than plastic toys in the corner. You know, with my son, I let him use probably too young knives and fire, but he's now an executive chef. We had a blast cooking together. So, okay, so if kids eat with their family, another thing, they eat more nutrient foods and more, and so their nutrient intake's higher and their whole overall dietary pattern is higher. But we also have to consider, you can be perfect at home, and then once your kids start running around with other people, their influences change. Okay, next topic here is this sad issue of body image. So when kids are young, they eat based on how hungry they are and how full they feel by the foods they're offered. Unfortunately, when they become middle school kids, they get influenced from the media, maybe before that, from media and their friends and peers. And going to school, girls and probably guys with this too, it's been more frequent with females, girls will talk to each other about their size, right? And they'll talk about dieting. And so sadly, girls without, instead of just embracing life when they're 10 to 12, they may start thinking about their size. So that involves weight issues. So young girls may develop preoccupation with weight, okay? And dieting may increase their risk for obesity. So if girls are practicing this in school, it may affect their health. So how does a parenting style roll into this? It affects their connections with their internal factors, and we're going to talk about this. How parents work with kids, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'll finish up this lecture with it, may involve different styles, and the authoritative style is the best. Okay, so parent and feeding styles. So I just mentioned authoritative. There are 4 categories per the literature of parent feeding styles: authoritarian, permissive or indulgent, neglectful, or authoritative. I will tell you now, this is the way we want to recommend that people go. So let's look at it. Authoritarian. Now I know that these types of things speak to people because our home life and our relationship with our parents may have been with the parents that are permissive or authoritarian or authoritative. So we can usually resonate with this. So authoritarian means high demandedness, low responsiveness. What that means is you do what I want you to do. Look at this guy. Clean your plate. You do what I want. And if you complain, I don't care. So I don't care about the kid's opinion. Shut up, here's your food. And this style, regardless of what you think about it, may influence a child to gain excessive weight as they grow older because of rebellion. So we don't really promote authoritarian, my way or the highway styles of parenting. So here's another one we do not really recommend, which is permissive or indulgent. So it's the breakdown is low demandingness, high responsiveness. So low demanding. Parents do not enforce demands on the child. Hey, there's no really rules. We love you, but you can eat whatever you want. I love you so much. Would you like 5 donuts? That'd be great. So they cater to the child instead of setting up parameters on how to eat. What happens to the child? There's an increased risk for them developing obesity, and they like sugar and salty foods because they're going to have them from the get-go. So the next style is neglectful or uninvolved. They don't ask much of their kids, and they don't really care so much. So this is the they don't care so much group. They don't place demands on the child, and they don't care what their opinions are. I love this. I'm sorry, but I have strong feelings about parents being on their phones during meals. And remember in the old days when we go to restaurants and parents would go there and we'd look. I would see so many parents that were. I've seen so many families where everybody's on their phone and there's a kid sitting there and they give them food, but they don't really look at them. So this is neglectful or uninvolved, and she has no idea what to do. And then there's authoritative. This is the one that's actually recommended, the style that's actually recommended for parenting feeding styles. Not to brag, this is my first grandson, and that's me wearing a fuzzy robe. But yeah, his parents naturally chose authoritative parenting feeding styles. He's also beautiful. So what does this mean? High demandingness. Like I want you, here's the rule. There are rules, you need to follow the rules and so forth. But then they're also responsive. Instead of going my way or the highway, they're like, let me listen to you. What's important to you? So this parenting style, all these are nuanced and we don't get any training on, but what the literature says is this is probably the best way to get a kid to be comfortable with eating, feed himself, and not be obsessed with weight. So it's reasonable expectations. You care, you listen. And what happens with the research is this increases desirable behaviors like eating more produce, being more active, having a low risk for overweight. Whereas it also decreases poor nutrition, being inactive, and risky behaviors. So in a perfect world, if we all trained on authoritative parenting, not only as parenting, but also as a feeding style, this would be helpful for us. Okay, so I'm done with this. Are there any questions or comments? So I'm sorry, Brad, it's really fun to see you and your baby. It makes my day. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't think anyone was even paying attention.
No, I see you. There's a couple of you that have your videos on. It really helps. So any comments from anybody? Any thoughts about this? Are you comfortable with the idea of authoritative parenting?
Can you give an example of authoritative parenting?
Yeah, thank you. So let's say you're going to have dinner and here's your food. And the kid says, I hate, you have 4 things on the plate and one of them they hate. But they think they hate it, they never really had it. And so they're like, yeah, I don't want to try this. So an authoritative parent would go, well, I understand that you want to try this, because it's hard to try new things. So I understand that you want to try this. However, what I know as a parent is that it's really good for you and for children to try new foods. Foods can fuel your body. Foods can make you grow better and help, so give them some reasons for it. So I want you to try a bite of this item and do this repeatedly. So your rules are you have to try a bite. You don't have to eat it all. You don't get aggressive, but you also don't be so permissive that they can sit in the corner and eat a bowl of Captain Crunch for dinner. It's nuanced, and that's what's hard for people, but listening to your kids and respecting their feelings, but also setting limits are good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I just was like wondering how you would, do that in practice.
you know what? Every parent, I tell you what, if I gave this talk, which I know what I'm talking about from the literature and having been a parent and all this kind of stuff. If I had to give this talk and there's 100 parents listening, they would all go, hey, but what about this? What about this? What about this? Because real parenting doesn't necessarily fall in these areas that we've talked about. However, people need this type of framework so that they don't try to push things on kids, be abusive about it, overwhelm them, you know, so it's always a dance and it's nuanced, but it still matters. It's not black and white, but it matters. I know none of you in the nutrition program wish your parents had just given you chocolate for 12 years, right? Do some of you wish you just had chocolate for 12 years? I may have missed the boat on that.
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Thanks for asking questions. I appreciate you guys. Anybody else have a comment?
So about food that are rich in calcium, soybeans and almonds are high in calcium, right?
Absolutely. We don't have to eat dairy to get calcium. We just need to eat plants that are good sources.
Okay. Because there's like almond milk and soy milk, so that's why they make it from them.
Okay, so what you want to do with those products is look at the label, you know, because some of them are gonna, because they're the replacement, like soy milk or almond milk, they're marketed to replace cow milk. Find out if they've added, because almond milk by itself doesn't have much of anything. It's low in protein, it's a little bit sweet, but if they've added calcium, it could matter.
Okay.
Great question. Look at the labels, you guys, especially in processed foods like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Are
Yes.
you aware of the bioavailability of the calcium in things like almond milk? Is it less bioavailable? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know actually. So it looks like we can take a supplement of about 500 milligrams of calcium from a variety of sources, and it seems to be okay. Calcium carbonate is in supplements, and that seems to be a common one that works okay. And it depends. So the highest, the source of calcium is an additive in foods. It's the highest bioavailability is calcium citrate, but you don't know if that's added. It depends on what they're adding. But what I would say is, unless somebody's following a really strict diet, it doesn't matter so much. If you're eating a variety, the typical dietetic advice is eat a variety of foods. So if you're going to eat almond milk and you hope it has some stuff, make sure it's got some in it, but you know, we don't want that to be the only source of calcium for your whole life. So there's a difference in absorption of different forms of calcium. Citrate is most absorbable. Carbonate is more common in supplements because it's smaller and people can gag them down, right? But all of them have like a 30-something, 33% absorption rate, which works.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are great. It's great to see you today and talk to you, and take care. I'll post this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.